All right, welcome to the online training here of machine maintenance. So this training is really designed for all shop bots. As far as if you have an older PRT, a new PRS, a small desktop, a buddy, any size machine, really, all this stuff is applicable to all your different machines. The only thing that really at the beginning here is will be about a 5 or 6 minute presentation on how to change a pinion. And if you're a desktop owner, you don't have pinions. You have a lineal rail setup, so you can just fast forward through that part, or you don't need to worry about that on your machine. But what we'll be covering today is changing pinions is a big thing. What to look for and how to change them. That's something that will wear out on your machine. Same with bits, collets. How to check your collets if they're good. How to grease it. How to grease the machine. Replace your felt caps. How do you surface the table? You got to have a nice flat table, and oiling and just general machine maintenance and squaring. So the kind of the nice thing about the ShopBot itself as a machine is there's not a whole lot on it that can go. There's not a whole lot that needs regular maintenance. What you have is to pretty much keep the thing clean. Um, your collets are going to wear out after a while being used. Bits are going to get dull, or bits are going to get broken, and those are really the main things. So, and then the other thing we get here a lot is our humidity changes a lot. So with our tabletop, our sacrificial board, the MDF tends to expand and contrast. So you got to flatten your table with the table surfacer. So that's the stuff we'll be getting into today. So again, welcome. I'm TJ, and let's get going on this. So the first thing I want to show you is some of the stuff I'll be covering today. You now will have this as a reference video, but to expand on this a lot more and look into some other topics that we won't be hitting on so hard is if you go right to our page, our main page, shopbottools.com, we've got a lot of resources right here online. So if you look here under right here along the top, shopbottools.com, and right here these little words, here's how you get to the forum, downloading the current software, and right here's a link called ShopBot Docs. And it's kind of made it nice here. You go in here and pick your style of machine, and there's some frequently asked questions. There's even a thing right here for maintenance. So right here under maintenance itself, how to check pinion play, how to replace pinions, a daily checklist. Some of this stuff here is all really useful things, and these are all things that we're going to go over today as well. So I just wanted you to see you have this stuff here. A lot of this is nice to print out and keep by the machine and have it for reference, so it's there. So one of the things we'll be starting out with here, since we're kind of going to lead off getting the pinions portion covered, is using a dial indicator to check pinion play. And sometimes you don't even need a dial indicator. Right here's the end of here's an end plate. This is the end of a gantry machine. And you can grab that with your hand with the machine powered up, not turned on as far as the spindle turning, but the machine's got power to it. And you can grab right here with your hand and pull back and forth, and you'll eventually get to a point where that's got a lot of play in it. If you can move that thing back and forth, a 1/16 of an inch, something's not right, something's not set on there. You don't need a dial indicator to show you that something's wrong. But this is a way to, once you get it dialed in, use a dial indicator to move it back and forth and see what you have for tolerance here. So these are just some of the different ways of checking on that. But what I wanted to get into here is actually adjust and actually putting in a new pinion gear. So again, this is something when I had to do the first set of pinions and printed this out, went out in the back, found the wrenches, and started replacing them. So what they're going to ask you here is if you call in, they're going to ask you what machine do you have. So lately we have been referencing all the machines. In your folders you would have what you would have here is this is the pack slip that we have sent out with your machine, and right on it we have how many teeth are on the pinion and the part number, so we would know. And just kind of reference on this too, your X and your Y motors have a 30 tooth, where your Z axis has a 25 tooth. So on a lot of the newer machines, they don't all have the same size. There's different ratios for different gear reduction motors. So that's one way to find out, if you have a newer machine, where to find what teeth you need. But really the easiest thing to do too is to actually take and count the number of teeth on the machine. So these are all things to have on hand before you call in and order a new set of pinions. Depending on your machine, a pinion set could be between $40 to $60, and we're going to go over a maintenance doc here in a sec that will show you how long these will last. And what this first video we're going to get into doing is we're actually going to take and remove the motor, change the pinion, and put a new one on. So as far as machine maintenance, this would go to all machines, and this is something we'll have. This file will be, obviously it's on the machine dock as well, but I've modified it a little simpler just to have it on one sheet to have it next to your machine. So we'll post this on there as well. So this is really a daily checklist right here. Warm up your spindle. If you have a spindle, you can do a C5, and that's just a shortcut for warming up your spindle. What you want to do is run your spindle C5, spindle warm-up routine, and what that would do is then warm up your spindle and let it run without a load being applied to it. You're not actually cutting. Your spindle's just up in the air above the table, and it's just spinning around, and it's just going to let the bearings and oil inside the spindle lubricate and let it get ready before you start cutting with it. Physically check the bit and collet nut for wear and debris. As you get into overconfidence mode, and especially on a shared machine, you're like, oh, that looks like it's a 3/8 bit in there, but upon further inspection you would find out that that bit might have had some carbide chipped out of it, or it might have been a metric bit, and then when you make your cut and you have a problem, it might be something as simple as just that. You're always going to want to home your machine. You never know who is using it last, and especially on a shared machine, either in a school or a shop. So zero the Z-axis, and you can do this. You have to make sure you zero it to however you zeroed it in your drawing file. If you zeroed it to the machine bed in your drawing, you better make sure you do it to the machine surface when you get out to your tool. And then finally, just do a proper orientation, router, spindle, vacuum, and dust collector. Make sure everything's running before you go. It's good inspection. And then this is where we're going to get into the maintenance videos of today. So one thing that I see I don't have on here that should be is, first things first, is you want to make sure that that fan above your spindle is working. If you don't hear the fan going, it's not blowing air on that spindle, and that spindle could get too warm. So always make sure that fan's on. Clean rack and pinions. Small brush and re-grease. We'll be going over this. Clean the Utilitrack. That's what's on your YZ car. That's what your spindle's hooked to, or your router's hooked to, and it goes up and down. Scrub all hardened V-rails, and just check your rack and pinions. And right here is the bottom one's really the one you see in the slide. Collets and pinions are good for 400 to 500 hours maximum if they're kept clean and have not been crashed. So we'll show you in a little bit what happens to some collets that have been crashed, and how if you crash it hard enough, you're not going to get your 400 to 500 hours out of these. So there's just your general maintenance dock. And there's a lot of different size pinions here. We stock probably 10 or 12 different sizes of pinions, because there's been so many different ShopBots over the years. So it's make sure you identify those before you call in. All right, so, and again, the desktop people, will be through the pinions here in just a few more minutes, and we'll get into general maintenance. So here we can see a brand new pinion, a really worn out pinion, and some pinions here that have needed to be replaced. So this was something I went and did a production support, where we go and do maintenance on people's machines for them. And this was one that I found these set of pinions on their tool. Well, if you can notice by the video here, it's pretty much worn down most of the way except for this back 1/16 of an inch. So that was showing me that this pinion was not properly lined up with the rack. And this is something that you do when you put your machine together, is you line that up. So there's a good pinion. And then there's a pinion that I don't know how that ShopBot was still cutting anything accurately. That thing is just gone. So I'm hoping that you will have found an issue back here on these bigger ones that are on the table still before you get to that level. So you'll have a pinion on each of your motors. Generally your X and your Y's are the same size and your Z is different. So inspect how many teeth that you have. You also have different shaft sizes for the motor shaft. Some of the older machines on PRTs, they didn't even have a keyway in their pinion. They actually had two flat surfaces that were perfectly round. So number of teeth, hole diameter, does it have a keyway? These are things that you'll want to know on your actual pinions. So again, this is just one thing with a rack and pinion type tool that can go bad. So this would be your buddies and your gantry styled machines. All right. So how do we change these pinions? There's no crazy magical way of doing this. It's pretty simple. A couple hex key wrenches, loosen some bolts, and we've got ourselves a new set of pinions. So on a gantry style, you've got pinions on both sides of your gantry. It's a buddy. You've only got one underneath for your X. So you got 4 motors on a full-size machine, and you got 3 motors on a buddy. So notice how this thing's it's got this motor plate, and we're not removing the actual blue plate here. We're not actually moving the blue plate. What we're doing is just removing the motor plate from the machine. So don't take the bolts out of the motor, take them off the blue motor plate. So this is a pinion that has been used on our production machine that's full of sawdust and just beat up. What I was doing with my finger there was saying, hey, pay attention to how the relationship to the top of the pinion and the top of the motor shaft is, because when we go and put a new pinion on, we got to try to realign it the same height. You got a lot of play on the shaft of this shaft of this motor, so you want to try to eyeball where that is and eyeball it back on for our initial startup. So these will have 2 set screws in them. To loosen those up, you might want to blow this thing off or wipe it down first before you try to stick the hex wrench in there. But you just have to keep backing them off, and eventually it'll come loose. That pinion will come loose off the motor shaft. Unfortunately, sometimes it gets stuck on there. So right there is me trying to pull it off, and it's just stuck on with that keyway in there. So what you can do here is, I say this very lightly, take a flathead screwdriver and try to pop a little on each side. Don't force it, because what you'll do when you force it is you could end up binding that shaft. What I do recommend is you go and get one of these right here. It's a gear puller. You can get these at any auto parts store, and you center this, center the puller into the center of the motor shaft, and these 2 hooks, they'll come down underneath the pinion, and as you twist the knob up here, it'll pull that off perfectly straight up. So obviously I didn't need it in that part because I already had it loose. But here we go, visually inspecting this, seeing that the teeth have been worn down, and I'm comparing it to the new one. I'm verifying that it's same number of teeth, same diameter, same size collet. I'm sorry, shaft size. And once you're happy with that, you go ahead and put this back on. Line up the keyway with the flat shaft of the motor. And again, it's not going to go down easily if it's already been a used keyway, but there me again lining it up close to how I had it before. I'm just eyeballing it, and I've got my set screw over that keyway. So here's looking at the end down your table, and I've removed the stop block so we can see. And this is the gantry up above, and here's the table going back to 96. And what I'm going to do here is visually stick this motor inside there and see where it lines up with the pinion, or I'm sorry, with the rack. So right here, this black here, that's the rack, and then this is the pinion that we just slid in. Those two need to be lined up with each other to run smoothly. So I'm looking in there and saying, okay, is it lined up? And to show you a little bit more specific on what we're actually looking for, I've mocked this up here with a rack and a pinion. So a pinion is a lot softer material than the rack. We're not always, if you're only cutting in one spot of the tool most of the time, you're gonna, and you wear down that rack, then you'll end up having to replace a 10-foot long rack, which is it was a lot of money and a pain to do. Where we wear down these softer pinions, it's a lot easier to change a pinion. So what we're looking for is something like this, where that's flush. I've got the 1/2-inch rack and a 1/2-inch pinion, and they lined up directly on top of each other. So I would go back to the machine here and stick that back in there and visually look from the end or from underneath, and what I can see is I've got a little bit of a gap here. And what I'm going to happen is it's going to wear down the pinion, and it's not going to wear it down evenly. It's going to wear it down like that one we showed in the previous video. So what I would then now do is loosen the set screws up a little and pull. I would pull the pinion up on the shaft a little bit, which I've already done. But what you see me doing now is taking Loctite and putting it on the set screws, because if we don't put the Loctite on there, those set screws could loosen up, and then that pinion could have some play in it. Sometimes you might just want to check these because your machine's got a little bit of play in it. It could be that your set screws have loosened up over time. The Loctite has failed. So at that point, you've now got this on. Wipe it down. We've lined it up as far as how length on the shaft, and now I've just kind of held it up. I haven't moved the gantry or anything, so it goes right back up into the rack. And I'm just hand tightening these bolts right now so the motor can rest in the slotted holes. And a T-handle screwdriver works real nice for this because you can get in there and get some torque on it with your hand, and it goes a little quicker. So I'm just going to take that and push it up with my hand and hold it, and I'm just going to kind of kiss the bolts to the motor plate, and I'm not tightening them, I'm just getting it snug. And then I'm really going to get underneath it here and put some force on it and tighten those down, get those good and tight. And that's how you change it, line it up, and put it back on. And your final check here is to grab that gantry end plate and see I don't see any play on there. So that means I've gotten that tightened back up. What you will feel is you'll feel a little bit of a tick because there is a little bit of a backlash in these type of motors. But if you're moving back and forth the 1/16 of an inch or greater, you better go back in there and tighten something. Something's loose. But if you're just feeling a little click click back and forth, that's just a little bit of play that is in the motor. So that part is normal. Another one to show you here is a PRT motor. So this one is done a little bit differently. Here's an old ShopBot. These back in the day, they didn't even have tables that were sent out. You pretty much just bought the rails up. The rails back then were a piece of angle iron that had a grinder that would grind a point to these, and then that's what the machine ran on. So this is one that was a production support where these guys are a production shop that are running. They actually have 3 ShopBots, and while the other 2 is running, we turned this one off and went ahead and recalibrated it. But for these, the motors are a little bit different. So on these, you actually have a spring that is torsioned down here. So you would just untwist this. It's going to let a little bit of play off the spring, and then what we'll do with that is just take this hook, and it comes off the bolt, and this is just on a pivot right here. This thing will just pivot back and forth. So then you'd put a wrench on this and put a wrench on the nut that's on the back side, and that's how you would that's how you take it off on there. So all these machines, they're going to have multiple motors. On a PRS or PRT gantry machine, you've got an X motor on each side, you've got a Y motor that runs the gantry back and forth, and you have a Z motor that goes up and down. If you have a buddy, you've only got 3 motors. You have 1 in the X versus 2 on a gantry, where you've got to have power on each side. So whether it's a gantry tool, whether it's a PRS or a PRT machine, it's pretty much the same concepts for aligning those racks. You want to align them. You don't want to get it in too far where it's scuffing, and you don't want to have it out too far where it's not running parallel. All right, so so that's pinions. Now let's get into stuff that pertains to all shop bots, even desktops. So collets and collet nuts. There are several different sizes between a desktop, a full-size machine, and even an automatic tool changer. You have different sizes of these collets. Not only do you have different sizes, you have them so they take different bits. Here's an 1/8 inch, a 1/2 inch, a 3/8, and a 1/4 inch. There's different size ones for routers as well. And what these are a 2-piece spring collet, and they need to be unsprung and all the air blown out of them, all the sawdust blown out of them, and then have them clipped back together. Your collet nut here that I'm holding and looking inside here, I'm feeling for if there's any ridges that are left. You're visually inspecting to see if there's any cracks or anything in it. If you start having stuff like that, that's a bad collet nut. Collet nuts don't often go bad. They're good for a couple thousand hours, but your spring collet will. You're going to lose some spring in there. So some people will start having problems where their bits starts cutting and then it slips out a little ways and starts cutting deeper because the spring is gone. Here's one here. Look at how burnt and used up this is in the middle. We can actually visually see that has been way too hot. And look how easy that falls out of there. That should fit in there, and you should not be able to shake that out. If that thing's falling out of there, your spring in that collet is no longer any good. So that's one to throw away. And collets, they're around $30 to $70, depending on how big a machine. These are ones that were run down into the machine too deep. I can't even spring those apart. So what that happened was that was zeroed in the wrong, and it actually dug down into the material, started spinning, and it sucked the material up into the spring, and now it has wrecked that. So there's a collet and collet nut that need to be thrown out. If you're breaking those apart with a hammer to try to save your collet nut, you need to just throw that collet nut out. Now look at this one. You got a nice shiny one, and then you got this oxidized one. This one here sits on the training table, and one of the people was in one of the basic training classes accidentally knocked over their Coca-Cola that they were drinking, and it spilled onto this collet, and we shook it off but didn't really clean it, and it was like that by the end of the day. It already started oxidizing, and it's gotten a little worse now over time. But something like that too, it's down inside those precision slots. That's no good either. That would be I'd throw that one right in the garbage. And finally, what is this happening here? Looks like we had a bad crash. So there are times where we have these little oopsies, and this here was dug into this aluminum. This was on an Alpha machine. It started cutting through, then lost the Z position, finally stalled out here and stopped. So it wrecked the bit. And if you have a hard crash like this, and I'm talking, this thing hit hard and stalled the machine out, more than likely you've wrecked your collet as well. Visually inspect the collet nut. That doesn't necessarily always break, but I can't see any physical things wrong with this. But just going and sliding that shaft back in there, it's so loose. It's really just very, very loose. I know that I've kind of dinked up those springs in there from crashing that into the aluminum. So if you have a bad crash like that, throw it away. So keep them things clean. Keep them blown out. And before you put them into your spindle, make sure you spring the collet and the collet nut together, and then stick it up into the spindle and start threading it. Those aren't designed to be put in there as individual pieces. All right, so there's your collet and collet nut. Next is greasing the rack. Now let's get creative here and let the machine do some of the work for us. So this is what most of our machines probably look like right now, which, it happens. You're in a shop, you're cutting, you don't have time for this kind of stuff, but any of this maintenance stuff that you can do will help prolong the life of your machine. So I'm going to wipe this thing down with a rag and just wipe off all the excess. Sometimes we even get a little brush out and brush out what's inside the gears. But a rack and a pinion is designed to have grease in there. Those little racks and pinions, they're designed to actually have grease inside there at all times. You want to be really lubed up on this. So this is what we use here. It's called Super Lube. It's a synthetic grease. And this stuff's really nice because it's clear. That way you don't have a black line across your belly every time you lean across your machine. So take this stuff and squeeze it on about 6 inches down your rack. And I'm squeezing a lot on. I'd rather have more on there than less. I'd rather wipe off a little excess. I want this thing greased up and running smooth. So once you've got it on there, just bring up your keypad and use your arrow keys and just move it back and forth and let it grease itself. There's no sense of you sitting there running it all the way back and forth. Do this 8 or 10 times and it will just roll the grease on. You can see where there's some extra already kind of blobbing out, but I'll just wipe that off. So keep this thing up greased good. I try to do mine once a month or like every 40 hours of use. That's what I do at home. Here at the shop, we're doing this probably about once a week. So, and just wipe off any extra. It helps keep sawdust and gunk from sticking to it. So, and then again, do this on your X motors and your Y and your Z. So you're going to do this on the rack on both sides of your gantry, and then there's a short rack right inside here. And you'll actually put some grease. You might need to get like I don't know, a scrap dowel or something, or a scrap piece of wood that you can put some grease on the end of it and stick it down in there. So keep things greased up. Another thing that's on the machines is there's a little grease ends on the ends of the gantries for the desktops, and that's where you can squeeze a little grease into those. You'll look there, if you look on your actual machine down in the bottom of the gantry, there's some little fittings there where you could put a grease gun on it and squeeze some grease into there. Alright, so the next thing is felt caps. These are something that get overlooked by most people. So this is on the inside of our gantry. Right inside of the beam. Here's the work table back here. And I'm taking these 2 little screws out because you've got 4 of these running along the gantry, and then you got another 4 of them going along the beam. So these are wiper caps number 2 and wiper caps number 3. More than likely the caps won't go bad, but what they'll do is I'll pull these off sometimes out in the field, and that whole thing will be full of completely full of doing that will be completely full of sawdust. So on a buddy, to get down and do either the X rack or the wheels on those, you'll actually just pull the power stick right off. Just pull the power stick completely off your machine, flip it upside down, grease your rack, and then take this oil and do all the wheels. I think you have 8 number 3s underneath a buddy. So I'm just going to oil the felt again, have it cleaned off, and then put it back on. Notice this has a slotted hole too. I can go up and down with it. I like to have it right down tight next to that V-track. That way it doesn't get full of sawdust. So on your gantry machine, do this to, you'll have 8 of these between your beam and your end plates. On a buddy, you'll have your wheels underneath, and you'll also have your wheels on your Z. So there's these ones right here. And the next scene is going to show you some other ones. But before you even think about these, those wheel number 2s that we just showed you, there's also these 4 number 3s. You got 2 of them back here on the top of your beam. And if you look underneath your beam, that's those eccentric wheels that if you installed your own gantry, you had to tighten those up to the beam. And same thing on the buddy. On the back of this YZ car, this is the plate that has your spindle or your router mounted. On the back side of it, you'll find 4 big black caps. And it's just like what I showed you in that video. Pull those off too. Those usually don't get as bad. And on the buddies underneath the table, it usually doesn't get as bad. But we'll all have this on buddies and full-size tools. It's right here on your YZ car. This is that Utilitrack. And that actually has 4 felt inserts that are protecting that. So I loosen these up, and just like before, you'll use some 3-in-1 oil. Wipe them out. If it's real dusty, blow that out with the air hose. And this one's not too bad. I'm just going to kind of wipe it off, wipe the stuff off there. You can actually pull that felt out of there and wash it if it's really bad. And then just re-lube it up, stick it back in there, tighten it down. You've got 4 of these that you got to do. You got 1 on each top and 1 on the bottom, and that keeps the dust out of the wheels for your YZ car going up and down out of that Utilitrack. So then I would take and use the page up and page down a few times. That'll do your rack, and it'll do these felt inserts. All right. And not, if I was just to be doing this on my machine, not talking, this whole process would take about 30 minutes to really go through and really just dial it in and get it dialed in to how I'd want it. So surface top. We're going to see in this next video here how a top eventually will either warp because of temperature climate changes, or 2, we've cut down into it so much that it's no longer flat. So yes, you could go into your PartWorks or your VCar Pro and draw a rectangle and surface it, or what we have right here from the regular ShopBot 3 software is if I go to Tools, I can come down here to Table Surfacer, and it brings up the Table Surfacer, and you could go in here and read about it to get a little bit more in depth on how it works and what it is. But what it really is I set it to the size of my machine, which I'm going to demo this on a desktop. So 24 by 18. I got a 1 1/4 inch diameter bit. I want to surface negative 0.03. You got to make sure you have that negative in there. Bit overlap percentage of 15. And then I want to start down here in the bottom left corner. I would click Make My Surfacing File. It would then save you a file. It will let you preview it, and then you can go and cut it. So what I'm going to do here is surface the top. So I'll zoom in here, and you can see we've got holes. We've got little voids here. Here's some footballs that were being cut. Those are cut down in. Here's another hole back here. I'm not going to be able to fix all the holes, but what I could do with that going negative 0.03 is I know I can get one nice new flat surface across the whole thing. And on a desktop like this, on our website, we've got the quick start files, so you can go in there and find the file that cuts the spoil board. So you can probably get 10 of the or 8 of these out of a sheet of plywood. So, or I'm sorry, MDF. So you could cut a bunch of them, and every time it just starts getting bad, you just do this surfacing routine, and it'll surface it down flat. A nice flat surface really makes the difference. And I've even seen on a little table like this at warping, just because of the humidity that we have here. Sometimes our shops got the doors wide open to the outside. Some days the AC's on, some days the heat's on. So just run that file, and you have a nice flat top. All right, finally, on all these machines is we want to keep them oiled up. So whether you have a desktop or a full-size machine, you've got some parts of the machine that need to be oiled. I like to take an air compressor and blow the whole machine clean. I'd actually wheel this out into the shop and just blow the entire thing off. And then I'll take a rag and wipe it down, and then I'll take some 3-in-1 oil again and take that, put it on the same stuff you put on the felt tips, and we'll take that and just put it in several different spots. You can run the machine around. I like on this stuff to actually take a rag and really, rub it into the metal. On your gantry machines, you have a V. It's a big hardened V rail that goes up and down the X, goes up and down the Y. You've got them on the top of your gantry and the bottom of your gantry. Once you get done doing the first half, move it to the other side and make sure you do what you couldn't reach that was underneath the YZ car. So rub them down, oil them. on your desktop too. Not only do you have your Y car here, but you've also got to go and do the ones along your X. You got one on each side of your gantry, and on your big machine, same thing. You've got V-rack all the way around it. So keep them oiled up. Here's a big machine here. Same thing. I'm going to wipe it down. Get that on there, and I like to rub it right into that right into that hardened rail. What will happen too sometimes in some shops, oh, there's some sound on this one. In some shops where there's salt water present, salt in the air, it'll actually make these rusted, so you want to keep them nice and oiled. Sometimes you'll even want to have a little Scotch-Brite pad and rub that down and rub the little rust off it before you put the oil on it. So, okay. Well, that is my machine maintenance simplified and in a rundown. This video will be posted up soon, and right next to it will be with this document will be posted right next to it too, so you'll be able to see a little bit more of the machine maintenance. So thank you for watching the video. Hope it helped you out, and we'll see you in the next time.